Good morning, everyone. What I'm going to talk about today is the talent availability and the impact of technology on this. So in terms of my background, I've been working in Cpl, so in the recruitment industry for the last 10 years. I'm the director currently of the Science, Engineering, Supply Chain and Construction Division, but my own background is biochemistry and science communication as well. And what I want to talk about is this specific area of talent availability and the impact that ageing populations have on this. In terms of CPL's touch points in this, in the last quarter, we have had, I suppose, a candidate touch point with over 100,000 candidates in the healthcare and science industry. So we're seeing this day in, day out. We see what the opportunities are. We also see what the challenges are. So this is the agenda. I'm going to talk about demographics. I'm going to look at technology and talent. So on the demographic side of things, you can see the stats there. So I suppose you see 23 million people in Europe are unemployed, yet vacancies are on the rise at the moment. You know, the interesting thing is that when you actually look at the data that's out there, 13% is the rate that we're at with global youth unemployment, whereas the overall average is 6% globally, which is interesting. The other thing to look at as well is that the International Labour Organization in 2013 said there was 202 million people who were unemployed, and that is was an increase of 5 million on the year previous to that. So you can see there is trends here, and for the first time ever, at the end of the decade, there was 2,000 people, there was less people working at the end of the decade than the start. Why? Because a number of jobs have been automated and technology is influencing. So, ageing populations is something we're facing across the Western societies. So what I'd like you to do is actually to think of what your perception of an older person is. So if I can ask you to draw a picture of someone who, like a face and a body, please, of what you perceive an older person to be like. Just take a few seconds to do that, and we'll continue on in a second, please. Great. Does everybody have something? So there's been interesting research done on this. Tony Buzan has investigated what people's perception is when you say the term older person. So you've got the Zimmerman, you've a person on a walking stick. But how many people drew a picture of a healthy person running? You know, how many people thought of that? And so that's the reality. We need to change our perception of an older workforce. The reality is, we have ageing populations. We are going to have people working far beyond 65 in the future if we want to sustain the economies that we have. So a couple of more stats to look through. In terms of you can see this is all pushing towards the fact of ageing population. So Singapore, by 2030, most of their population will not be at a working age. So what does that say about the future there? Sweden, 64% of people are now in single households. And then an interesting fact there in the UK, so you've got 1 in 3 babies born in 2012 in the UK are expected to live past 100. Interestingly, the stats say that 2% of people are going to live to 120. So then what does that mean? I mean, you get married at 30, you have 35 years of beautiful marriage, you break up and you wait like 5 years before you meet somebody else, and then essentially you're married for another 35 years. And then you break that off again and you have 20 years on your own. So that's the reality of, you know, if someone was to live that age. And then you've got the stat there, the French, you know, 40% of French people are over 55 and not working. So the French have a real problem. And that's not something their current government's looking at because it's not going to affect things, but in the future, it's going to impact the amount of talent they have in their country. So 2.1 is the golden number. That's the rate we should be replicating our populations at. And right now, you know, we either need to make more babies or import more staff or more babies into the countries or get more talent coming into all of our different markets. So you can see in Europe, we're below that. We really have a problem. And in particular, the European market is our median age is by 2030 will be 44.7. So that's really interesting. So in terms of accommodating older workers, Norway's leading the way at the moment. So you can see in Norway you have people who are, you know, into their late 60s still working. France, I've mentioned already, are far behind the curve. And you can see Japan and Korea are doing quite well in those stats. So they're preparing for the future. In terms of university education, so the value of the university degree is falling. You know, UNESCO has said by 2030, 1 in 2 will have a university education. And then the real interesting thing is the growth of massive online open courses. So it's allowing, you know, populations that wouldn't have traditionally had access to education, and this is allowing this market to open up. So this will affect talent availability. Another stat is that, not that women are taking over the world completely, but that the numbers of students by gender, women are topping the poll in terms of education. So you need to think about what are your companies doing about attracting women into your organisation. Women are also a very prolific consumer, so they're often making purchasing decisions in households. So this is something that needs to be thought of, and they're very strong on social media, so they're very equipped for the future and the technology that is coming with that. So I've mentioned about the massive online open courses. So hyperconnectivity. The stats say that, you know, we'll have 5 billion people who have access to the internet by 2025. The reality is right now that in countries that don't have electricity or refrigeration, there are people who have mobile phones, you know, powered by solar energy. So as Bill Gates said, there mightn't always be banks, but there'll always be banking. So you have people who can actually do their online banking without actually physically, you know, even having electricity to do that. So that's a very interesting concept. And there are people who will, over time, access these online courses and access, you know, educational resources that can ensure that they will have, you know, a better future. So I don't know if anybody ever heard of Khadija Nayasi. No? So this is a very good point of hyperconnectivity and the reality of internet coming into less traditional markets. So Khadija is 12. That's her at the Davos, so the World Economic Forum. She undertook a Stanford course in physics at the age of 10. She completed it and came first in the world in this course. So she's a genius, okay? So here's somebody who has been unearthed, who previously wouldn't have been unearthed potentially. And, you know, she's sitting amongst the likes of Bill Gates at this event. And, you know, it's just, the accolade is incredible. So just to talk through, this is just more of a sort of a question to put out to the audience. I mean, how will health checks change with more data on genes? Very controversial. A number of countries have legislation put in place to restrict the access to genetic information. However, will this affect the world of hiring in the future? More than likely. It's certainly going to affect insurance companies and that area, so it's something to think about. I mean, we've got the iconic Meet the Parents lie detector test there, but I mean, it is something about it may influence how we screen people and how we actually interview in our eventual hiring processes. So in terms of technology, I'll go back one, technology disruption. Every industry has been affected by technology at the moment. So disintermediation is affecting all of these. I've only taken a couple of examples of businesses, but taxis, for instance, the traditional business of hailing down a taxi off the road doesn't really happen as much anymore. Halo is something that's taken that over. The likes of Alibaba, for instance, has replaced, you know, is actually bigger than eBay and Amazon put together in the Chinese market. So 600 million people in China are online, 300 million are doing online shopping. So the reality is, how is that affecting retail shops? Okay, detrimentally. So you have to think about your businesses. How is your business going to be affected by disintermediation? Absolutely. So you need to think about you know, really working towards a future and making sure it's not affected too detrimentally. If you don't believe me, look at the jobs the iPad has done away with. So there's just a couple of different examples to go through there. And so changing world of work. So the Oxford University has brought out statistics about the jobs that and the percentage chance of them being automated. So you can see things like telemarketer, 100%, insurance underwriting, 100%. There always is going to be a need for, you know, for the human interface. And I'll talk about that a little bit further. So occupational therapists, mental health social worker. I mean, the key skills of a high emotional intelligence, really strong communication skills, high levels of empathy will always be in demand. But certain jobs certainly will be automated. An example of this is a bowling alley pin setter. So you can see the kids used to come along and reset the pins many moons ago. That's obviously been automated. So a little bit of a facetious one to say, but in terms of this is happening. So importance of the human interface, big data. It's affecting everything, it's everywhere. But the reality is data needs a context. So I've just looked at the likes of Ben Goldacre. He's you know, a famous journalist for the, and he would write you know, articles in The Guardian, particularly in bad science. And one of the examples that he had was an article in 2005, and it was, interestingly enough, it was a science story that made the editorial, which doesn't happen that often. And this story that came through was saying that that individuals, so a professor had did work and had studied individuals who had watched Richard and Judy. And what they found is that when these people did IQ performance tests, they actually performed better. Now, I mean, that's questionable data. It wasn't published afterwards. I think that needs more research. Things like, another thing you'd see in papers is infidelity is in your genetics, the perfect way to eat ice cream, the most depressing day of the year. These are things you see all the time coming through from the media and in terms of picking out relevant things that they think from a science story. But again, that's data, but that needs to have a human context and needs to be researched in more detail. So, Lane Book. Has anybody ever heard of Lane Book? No? Okay, so it takes the worst, I suppose, and funny information from Facebook and puts it on. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that your company brands are intrinsically linked to your employee brands. So no longer can you offer out a corporate message from your corporate communications department about what your company stands for and what it means. That doesn't happen anymore. The reality is that what your employees are saying on the likes of Glassdoor.ie, Boards.ie, Facebook, Twitter, that's the reality. That's your message that's out there. So this individual here, imagine if he worked or she worked for your company. That's not ideal. Okay, so if somebody came across this, is not the kind of thing you want to see. But where's the border? Where's the line between privacy and things like that? But it is definitely blurring. So to talk about talent, innovation exponential growth. This has happened in all of the markets you would have expected in the US, in Europe. But that again, with the likes of hyperconnectivity that I was saying, this is changing. So it's not always going to be the countries anymore who have the technology, have the money, and have the knowledge. This is starting to definitely migrate out to other markets. The same talent clusters, so these are traditional talent clusters for universities. This is where it is right now. That will change in the future too. So this is an interesting slide. Professor Juan Enriquez from Harvard suggested that we all have, if you think about the traditional tattoo, every single individual has an online tattoo now. So we have our online message about ourselves. Celebrities in the past would have thought, I'm always been followed around by camera, I have no privacy. But the reality is, anybody who has any sort of profile, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Google, whether it's on Facebook, you can see from the likes of Lane Book that your information is out there. So we all have an online tattoo. So it's thinking what that says about you. This is a very good story about Target, and what I'm trying to say is how big data affects people on a day-to-day basis. So an irate husband walks into a Target store, an irate father walks into a Target store, very upset because his 16-year-old daughter is after receiving information about pregnancy. And he's thinking to himself, my goodness, why has it happened? The shop assistant's embarrassed, runs out, has a look at the database, and goes through everything on the database and goes, look, sir, what's actually come up is that, she's changed from scented to unscented shampoo. She's got, she's looking at vitamins, and she's looking at different types of clothes. So our system predicts an 89% chance that she's pregnant. So the father's still irate, he heads home, and, and that's fine. Shop assistant calls a few days later and says, look, I'm very sorry about this. I hope, we can resolve it. He goes, actually, she is pregnant. That's the reality. So you've got the likes of Target telling you something about your daughter that before you even know it. How does that translate to talent availability and to what it says about the market? So Bullhorn Reach have this site called Radar, and it predicts the likelihood of people in your business looking for a new job. So they're looking at, are they updating their profile? What are their number of connections? What are they doing right now? So you can tell if some of your key staff are actually looking for another job. So maybe you can do something about that. So, what does your electronic digital profile say about you? Is it going to get you that promotion? Is it going to make you, is it going to help you get your next job? These are important things that everybody needs to be looking at for themselves. Right now, when you've got recruiters like myself, or you've got companies who are looking to search for talented people, and they're looking for technological backgrounds, for instance, the business analysts have taken as an example here. This is a typical LinkedIn search, a Boolean search, very complicated. And this can be used on LinkedIn, it can be used on Google, it can be used on a database, in an internal firm. But the reality is, that's what's been used to find CVs now. So the other thing you need to think about is, and everybody needs to think about, is the traditional form of the two-pager CV is not going to work anymore. You need to think is what, if I'm looking for a job, is my CV search engine optimized? Are the right keywords coming up there as well? So that's, in terms of conclusion, what I've tried to cover off today is the demographical influence on talent availability. So ageing populations will influence the availability of talent. So we need to start changing our perception. In recruitment, I mean, I'm often asked the question of, you know, I want somebody with 5 years experience. And what they say is, you know, typically a graduate who's 5 years. That's perception has to change. We need to be thinking, okay, maybe there's somebody who's 20 years in a different type of business, 10 years in something else, but you know what, they've retrained and they've been 5 years in the relevant industry here. This is the kind of person we should be hiring. So this is a complete revolution in terms of how we've been thinking here in the Western world, but that's what we need to do. So changes in education, hyperconnectivity will widen the global talent pool. You know, the example of Khadija in Pakistan, for instance, so there will be great talent that's going to come out of emerging markets. Technology's influence in talent availability. So technology could become central to your business as opposed to a support to your business. And this is what we need to think about too. Big data will be viewed as a strategic asset, and skills in this area will be key for future hires. And that applies to the healthcare industry and any, you know, technical industry. But the key caveat I'd like to leave you with as well is that emotional intelligence, ability to influence, and communication skills are going to always remain critical aptitudes for the future of hiring. Thank you very much for your time.